Welcome to Teal Talk, a podcast brought to you by the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. That's OAESV for short. We're your hosts, Taylor
and Lori.
In each episode, we speak with professionals in the field to dive deep into the intersectional issues that affect survivors in Ohio.
Before we begin, we want to give a content warning that we will be discussing sexual violence and other issues that may be upsetting and triggering. If you need help, please feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. Please take care of yourself.
Hi, my name is Faith Foster. I work with the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence as a grants and financial administrator. I just attended the alcohol and consent block, and my takeaway was that the culture that we have around alcohol and drinking really diminishes the consent that people are allowed to give and that is received. Just really not acknowledging that alcohol has a huge impact in the way that we give consent and the way that others are perceived as well.
Hi, I'm Anita.
I'm Angela.
And we come from Project Sanctuary in Fort Bragg, California.
And so we just did the Digging Deeper, Uprooting Internalized Sexism, and to supporting advocates and their clients.
So it was a great session. Today I learned how to basically speak my own needs, aside from the clients, and how that will help me kind of move forward in this work and the movement. I'm realizing that in order for me to be able to speak up, especially about myself, I have to find myself in spaces that are very rooted in equity and not only inclusion, because those two are very different. So it made me think, how can I create those spaces myself?
Something that I learned would be that be a really good advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. And in order to stand up for yourself, you would stand up for your clients as well. And just pretty much do the walk and not do the talk to help your clients through this. And so it was just a great workshop.
I'm Susan Wismar, she, her, and I work at Otterbein University, supervising their prevention and response to dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And this session on housing equity really matters to us because our students are experiencing more housing instability than ever. And if we want to keep them supported to becoming all that they can be, then it's part of our job to move outside our campus area, move in these societal level risk factors that need to be shored up, need to change.
Hi, my name is Solange Ramkasoon. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I attended the NSAC conference session, Measuring Love as Prevention. It was phenomenal. Radical self-love really needs to be embodiment in our advocacy work, particularly for folks who are younger in the field. We need to start embracing love through advocacy to make sure that we're seeing the humanity in people, not just the crisis when they come to us. And really, within prevention, it does start from the person, the advocate, and making sure that we are knowing how we are showcasing love and that it may be different through other people's eyes of what love means. And that really starts about valuing our differences in the world and how we see the world. And it does start with love because you respect people like that. So really, prevention needs to embody more of love, seeing the whole person intersectionality, and really embracing the differences of who we all are.
Hello, and welcome to our 6th episode of Teal Talk. What you just heard were live recordings of folks across the country at the National Sexual Assault Conference held in San Francisco. So OAESV went on a plane all the way to the West Coast.
Mini planes, multiple planes.
Yes. Before we dive into that, I should introduce myself. I'm Lori, the Communications and Content Coordinator at OAESV, and my wonderful co-host is...
Taylor. Yes, I'm Taylor. I'm the Chief Officer of Communications and Engagement at OAESV. And we are actually joined by a third OAESV team member today. So exciting. We are here with Caitlin Burke. Caitlin, she, her, is the Director of Prevention and Public Health at the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence, OAESV. That's us. Caitlin's mother, whose career included forensic nursing at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, introduced her to the anti-sexual violence field. Her experiences of sharing her mother's work and leading a peer education group in college solidified her dedication to violence prevention and led to her decade-long career in the field. She grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and earned a bachelor's degree in biomechanical engineering. I always love that, Caitlin, from Marquette University before receiving a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University. She is a Bloomberg American Health Initiative Fellow, focusing on the critical public health problem of violence. Through this initiative, Caitlin joins a nationwide network of frontline public health workers dedicated to violence prevention. Caitlin profoundly believes in the power of prevention and reimagining our world. She is an avid baker in her free time and a lifelong learner. We're so glad to have you on our team in general, Caitlin, and here with us on Teal Talk.
Caitlin Burke, MPH. Woo woo.
I know, that was like the big thrill, is that I got to put MPH behind my name at the conference.
I love that. Big accomplishment. And I think a lot of people maybe don't realize that sexual violence is a public health issue. So off the cuff, would you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I was interested in the fellowship, because it did have an entire focus on violence prevention, which you don't often see in public health, but it very much is a public health problem. It leads to negative health outcomes. It's also a negative health outcome itself. And so violence fits really well into that field. For those who are doing prevention, we often use public health tools and models and frameworks. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting perspective when you're looking at violence through a public health lens.
Thank you. I know I've learned a lot from you about that, Caitlin.
Thanks. Yeah, I could talk about it all day.
So there were a lot of prevention-focused workshops this year at NSAC, so I'm looking forward to diving into those a little more with you, Caitlin. And for those of you that don't know, NSAC is not like a football league. Like, it sounds like ESPN. Like, NSAC is the National Sexual Assault Conference. So it brings over 2,000 advocates every year together that are all invested in ending sexual violence. So the 2023 conference theme was Equity in Action, and the conference itself provided opportunities to share information and resources, advance our learning, develop new skills, and increase our capacity to work towards a world free from sexual violence. It was just such an amazing opportunity to build strong partnerships with people across the nation that we may not ever get to be in conversations with. And this was my first time attending a national conference and going on an out-of-state work trip. So that was really exciting for me. Have you two attended NSAC before?
I've only attended the virtual option the last couple of years. So I started at the coalition in late 2019. And prior to that, I worked at a local center, and we just never really had the funds to attend this national conference. So it was super exciting. So I've only done virtual, and so it was amazing to see the scale of it in person.
Yeah, I'm privileged to have attended in 2019 when NSAC was in person still, and we were in Philadelphia. So that was really cool. We also had some local programs attending that year as well. I'm really proud to see Ohio have such a big representation. There was even somebody that I saw that said they were from Ohio that I had never seen them before. Like, I didn't know who they were. We did see Molly McMath, shout out Molly. So I knew who she was, but this other person, I was like, great, like more Ohio people. So it was just really neat. You know, there's always Ohio jokes. There's like an Ohio joke on TikTok right now, like a long running thing. And actually we're doing a lot of cool stuff here. And so great to see and hear.
Yeah, I saw Terry Poor, and I've only ever seen her virtually, and it was like a celebrity sighting. I was like, I didn't know we were in LA.
LA.
I love that. I saw also Chris Bine from RSP. And I was thinking, like, seeing all these people in person, it's so interesting to see what height they are. Because virtually, like, you really can't tell. Who knew? It's just so funny, like, the virtual world and the things it makes us, like, think about.
Oh my gosh. It's funny you say that because I was just at a meeting right before this conference and someone said I'm shorter than they thought, which I don't usually get because I'm a really short person. And so usually it's like, oh yeah, you're short. So I like that virtually I look taller.
You have tall energy.
Yeah, right.
I also loved the sheer number of people that were there when you're used to working at a small nonprofit. Most violence prevention programs or organizations are on the smaller side. Being there with 2,000 so people, it's like, wow, we have a whole army with us in this work. It's very inspiring.
Yes, it was amazing.
Yeah, I think to me that's one of the most exciting parts about going to the national conference, because coalition work is so different from the local program work, and sometimes it can feel really lonely. We're not doing direct services in the way that the local programs are. And other coalitions in Ohio are doing other types of work, even if it's anti-violence work. So to be around people that are doing anti-sexual violence work at the coalition level was really cool and affirming. Sometimes hearing that they're having some of the same problems is like not great to hear, but it is affirming to hear, you know? So that was really neat. Now, if we can just get more communications conversations happening at the national conference, then I think I'll feel even more at home.
So that's us. That's our calling.
Right, like talk about representing Ohio. You guys should submit next year.
We will.
Yeah, I went to this coffee shop close to the hotel and I was wearing my name tag and my backpack. It says OAESV on the back. And this other person in the shop was like, "Are you from the Ohio Coalition?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "I've seen so many of you around here." I was like, wow, we're being noticed.
Did she say if you were taller or shorter than she thought you would be?
Well, I don't know if she knew who I was, but I'm like the quiet face behind the social media.
Yeah, you're like the Wizard of Oz.
Can I add to what you said, Taylor, about just like the feeling of being around folks who are at the coalition level? It's very similar to how I was feeling when I was in some of the prevention workshops, and also the day before the conference was what's called the Rape Prevention Education, or RPE, dialogue. And so this was a gathering of coalition members, of state evaluators, of state funders for RPE. And it was just a room full of people who are into prevention. And it felt incredible to be in that space because prevention in general is often misunderstood, even at the coalition level. And so sometimes it can feel like we're just constantly trying to define what it is versus have deeper conversations about how we can be doing prevention or how we can be doing it better. And so it just felt great to be with folks who are thinking about some of the same things, where we're not just having to define it, but we're thinking ahead and thinking to the future of like what prevention could look like. And it just felt really great. So I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I wanted to talk about.
I love hearing that. And actually, in one of the workshops I was in, I think somebody said that exact thing. Like, what is prevention work at the coalition level? And are we doing it? And, you know, what does it look like? What should it look like? Sort of thing. So, wow. Very meta here. So what did y'all do in San Francisco other than the conference?
I was really excited to have a chance to explore the city a little bit, either in the morning before the conference started or after it ended, and like hanging out with my coworkers on a different level. 2 coworkers and I went to get some noodles in Chinatown, and it was very authentic. And I was not going to ask for a fork. I was just going to be brave and use the chopsticks. And I was slurping and making such a mess. And I was like, okay, you've seen a side of me I never thought you'd see. So now we're officially on that level. Taylor, did you go whale watching? I have to know.
Yeah, we saw 5 whales. It was so cool. My mom was able to come with me to San Francisco. We did go whale watching. It was so awesome. First of all, the weather was beautiful. The ocean was beautiful. The captain and the naturalist, I think is what the title of the person is, on the boat were just so kind, and like they were making it fun and exciting, and it was like we were all little kids, and it was just great. So he told us a little bit also about the process that they use for their research. So he tries to take photos of the bottom side of each whale's tail, and then they can identify each whale with that, which was so cool. And you can find them on the website. So then you can go see like the 5 whales that we saw. It will say, San Francisco Whale Tours. And then we can see what else that whale is up to the next time it is seen, where else will it be seen and things like that. So it was just really neat to see them and experience that and learn about the whole process and a little bit more about what we can do to, keep the oceans cleaner and safer for those beautiful creatures. So it was a very cool experience. Caitlin, what did you get into?
I like to plan my trips around food and bakeries. And so what I loved about San Francisco is that they love a little coffee shop. And so there were so many coffee shops around where we were staying and just across the city. So it was fun to see the different ones that were around. And I really wanted to go to the beach, to the ocean. And so I did. I was able to go over. There's a little coffee shop over there, which was fantastic. And I started my morning over by the Pacific Ocean, and it was just beautiful. And we ended our last day with a sunset dinner by the ocean, which was really nice too. So it was fantastic.
That sounds so beautiful. I was just blown away by the ocean. It's nothing like good old Lake Erie.
Did you know the Pacific Ocean is the largest, this is one of the things I learned. It's the largest, thing on the earth. I forget what word he used for it, but it's like the biggest thing. So I was like, wow, it's like bigger than any continent, et cetera, et cetera. So to be in that and on that was really cool. Definitely not Ohio, but Ohio's still great, but the Pacific Ocean is pretty cool.
There's something so vulnerable about conquering your fears in front of other people too. Our coworker Jasmine, she's the housing coordinator here. We walked to the very end of the beach to get a closer look at the bridge, and there was this giant rock structure, and I was like, the photo would look so much better if we were standing on this rock structure. And there was crashing waves, and it was slippery, and I was wearing Crocs, and I was like, well, Jasmine did it, so I can do it too. And I climbed up on this rock structure, and I took a long time to get there, and I was shaken away, and there was a crowd watching me, which was even worse. Aww. But I got the photo, and it's probably my favorite photo of the whole trip, so it was worth it.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's a great photo. You both had such good photos. It was like you both had influencer level photos of your San Francisco trip. That was great.
I could talk about San Fran and bakeries and coffee shops all day, but I think we need to shift over and dive into the goodness that we learned at the conference and all these wonderful workshops and inspiring speakers. Who's going to get us started?
Well, I have 12 pages of notes, so I don't really know where to start. In terms of thinking about the plenary sessions, which I love a good plenary where everyone is having, that experience together. I do want to shout out Tony Porter from A Call to Men. I feel like we have a special connection to Tony here at OAESV since he has come to Ohio. He spoke at the Attorney General's 2 Days in May conference. He has spoken at our Shine the Light fundraiser. He has, worked with Javon very closely on engaging men initiatives and projects. So I just love hearing from Tony. He does great work. And he shouted out Rosa, our CEO. So that was cool in front of the 2,000 people. And it also just was beautiful the way that he was highlighting Black women who do anti-sexual violence work and giving their flowers is the term that was used, and just recognizing, first of all, people that have been doing this work for a long time and Black women in this field, and specifically naming names. And it was just beautiful. And he was like unapologetic about it. It was necessary and awesome. So great to hear a man acknowledge that when, this work is being done so largely by women, and we need men in this work. And also, it has to be done in a way that respects the work that has already been done and is being done by women, and particularly Black and brown women. So that was one of my favorite moments.
I agree. I thought all of the plenaries were really meaningful in different ways. So the first day seemed to have more of a federal focus with the different organizations that we work with on a statewide level and also a federal level. So Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Office of Violence Against Women. So that was an interesting way to begin, given, I think, especially that where the national conference will be next year. And I also loved day 2. Like, Tony Porter was fantastic for all the reasons that you said, Taylor. And it's just always, it feels like a gift to be able to hear him speak. I also really appreciated Dr. Alan Walker's presentation on day 2. They brought a perspective that we just don't hear a lot. And I think that it's a really long, nuanced conversation that our field hasn't quite started yet, but I do think it was, it's on a national stage. So it was, one of the first times that we're hearing about the research that they're doing at the Moore Center. So I thought that was fantastic. And then, of course, hearing from a young person too, doing this work and her experience was really fantastic. So yeah, day 2 for me was like really impactful.
Yes. Are you talking about Pony White?
Yes. She was great.
Yeah. I remember turning to you, Caitlin, after she spoke and saying, like, she did not waste a word.
Yes.
Like, every word that she said was like impactful and hard hitting and just saying 1,000 words in one. So I was like, yes. Woo. I felt like held accountable for my work just hearing her speak for that short time.
Exactly. And I think as a coalition, sometimes we get so removed from some of that direct work, especially direct work with youth, that even though we might not be taking something very specific back into our work, because a lot of coalitions just don't do direct services. For prevention, we often say it's better if it's coming from a program that has staff or people or connections within the communities that they're working in. But it is such a great reminder that this work starts way earlier than we think. And even if we have restrictions on serving young people, or if, we partner with organizations that are specialized in working with children, it's important for us to be reminded that we got to start earlier, and that young people like Pony are like already doing it. And we have to listen to that.
It was inspiring to hear from both young people in this work and people who have been doing this work for longer than I've even been alive. I attended a workshop with Pony, and when she speaks, she commands the attention of an entire room. So it was so inspiring to hear from her. And she was even acknowledging how young she was and how it affects the way she shows up in spaces sometimes, because people might look at someone young and think that they don't know what they're talking about. It just showed me that young people do have voices worth listening to. I already knew that, but hearing someone and watching someone stand on a stage in front of 2,000 people and command the attention of an entire room, it only solidified that point even stronger, and it was really inspiring. I know I'm a little bit older than Pony, but it was even inspiring for me to see and be like, wow, that's something like I want to one day do if I ever have the the bravery that Pony has.
So what were some of y'all's favorite workshops?
Oh, that's really hard, Taylor. I know you said you have 12 pages of notes. I also took a lot. There were a lot of really applicable prevention tracks that I'm super excited about that I think we can take back to our state, both with like TA, so technical assistance. So there's one about housing justice. And from my perspective, that was really focused on like a local level. So this would be a great example of how we can provide technical assistance to a program that's trying to do something similar. Another workshop that I went to talked about evaluation. And that's something that we're always trying to figure out in our state is how do we evaluate our programs? How do we collect necessary data to fully understand the scope of the issue in the state and also our programs making the kind of difference that we're hoping that they will. The one that really stuck out to me was from New York. And so it was titled Towards a New Paradigm of Anti-Racist Health Equity in Primary Sexual Violence Prevention. So it was going through how their state did a health equity capacity assessment, which is something that Ohio Alliance is going to be going through this next year. So it's taking all sorts of notes about how we can integrate this into the work that we're doing. So this one was like exactly something that we could do and is in fact something that we're going to do. So yeah, I just was so pleased that there were things that we could just take back and immediately implement.
I'm looking at you, Lori.
The great pause. I attended a workshop titled Changing the Narrative Through Storytelling, and it was a live podcast recording. So I was like, okay, I do a podcast. I also am big into storytelling. For listeners that don't know, I was a news reporter for 2 years, so my background is actually in journalism. And it wasn't until I realized that I could kind of merge the fields of communication and advocacy is how I found this work, is how I studied public health, and I too have an MPH at the end of my name. This workshop was super interesting, and it was about how to change the narrative around this work through storytelling. My first thought was, oh, we're going to go in and hear how do we empower survivors to share their own stories or learn more about survivor storytelling. And it actually wasn't anything about that. It was the total opposite, which had me hooked from the start. So I'm just going to read through some of my notes here and then watch your minds also explode. So, so they started out by saying that when you tell people what you do, that you work in the sexual violence field, one of three things happens. Either people look at you with a woeful look of empathy, they say an inappropriate comment, or they disclose. And this workshop was all about how we as advocates or as sexual violence preventionists know the stories of this work, but the people around us don't. The stories that we have as advocates, they also matter. The workshop was all about using our stories to tell the story of what we do as advocates. Whenever people ask you to share a story about your work, most people just immediately start sharing a story about a survivor they worked with or a client interaction they had. And we never insert ourselves as the advocates into the story. It's always all about the survivor, which of course is super important, but we can't exclude our own narratives as advocates. We've worked so hard to focus on the survivor that we've taken out the human element that is us out of the narrative. They went on to share that people in this field are often afraid to be honest because they're afraid of what their supervisor will think or what their funders will think. And when you hear the phrase storytelling and sexual violence, you think that people are asking you to share a story about how you experienced harm. But there's so many other stories in this work that aren't about harm. So I was like, whoa, because it's so true when people are like, share your story. The first thing I think is a story of survivorship, a story of healing, a story of triumph or overcoming. And the whole point of this workshop was to show that there's more to our work than just harm and healing harm. And yeah, I kind of sat there afterwards and I was like, what story would I share if someone asked me to share a story about my work? And like, how do I share a story about myself that doesn't involve a survivor? And it was really interesting to think about.
Or even like work at the coalition level doing like communications work, which seems so far removed from a survivor, but really it's not. So it has me thinking, absolutely. And it makes sense because as advocates, we're so used to, like, you do remove yourself, you do make it all about the survivor. Every question, every statement, every comment is about them. Like, what you wear is about them, like what everything. So that absolutely makes sense. And I really hadn't thought of it as being so simple. It's not simple, but you know what I mean? Like, we can do this storytelling. And if people don't understand what we do, we can just tell them. Like, we can just talk about it. And yeah, that honestly, like, really has never occurred to me.
I think it's especially important when you consider that many people who work in this field are survivors themselves. So we could say that many of us do have stories of survivorship, but we also have stories as advocates as well. And something they mentioned in the workshop is when people ask you, what do you do for work? People will say like, oh, is it because you're a survivor? And like, that's a little too much information for some random stranger at Kroger to ask. If you do decide to disclose and say, yes, I am a survivor, and that's why, I felt a passion to do this work, suddenly the people hearing that think, oh, it's because you have an axe to grind. And it just goes so much deeper than that. And it goes so much wider than that. And this work isn't always about person-to-person interactions like we spoke about earlier. Like, what are we doing at a state level? What are we doing at a national level? Prevention isn't just the one-on-one interactions we have. Yeah. It was a really cool workshop about how we just can't exclude our own narratives, and it gave me a lot to think about. And it was a live podcast recording, so we'll be able to listen to it on the Valor podcast.
Great. I attended, I think it was the leadership track. There were a lot of workshops that were about leadership and particularly about anti-oppression within the field and within your organization, about supporting Black, Indigenous, people of color, staff, and especially leaders. So it just really had me thinking a lot about the experiences of people within OAESV and just in Ohio and in the field in general that are Black, Indigenous, and or people of color and other identities that might be marginalized by our society as well. So trying to, really reflect on that and think about how these things apply. I love a good workshop that has a bit of theory and also practical application at the end. So I'm not left feeling like, what now? And a really good one was Practicing What We Preach by Veronica Quinones. And she really asks us to think about quite a lot of things. One being that even within your organization, your staff can fall in different areas of the spectrum of understanding anti-oppression work, being on board, practicing anti-oppression work, and that can create quite a bit of tension. So that's on my mind. Also thinking about discomfort versus safety and who actually has the power in a situation, who does the structure of, oppression, prioritize or oppress, and the structure of our organization. She had us thinking about productive conflict. So really trying to nip problems in the bud, thinking about being courageous and holding ourselves and other people accountable. And that conflict doesn't always have to be bad, that we can get things out in the open and talk about them. And that's helpful, right? Otherwise, it's going to bubble below the surface, and the way that will come out is in discriminatory practices and like in oppressive results. Also thinking about building inclusion and recognizing biases and attempting to correct them. So whether it be within leadership, within performance evaluations and hiring practices. And then she gave a lot of policy recommendations. So I wrote all of those down, and I hope to also revisit her slides, but just really helpful things and detailed things that you can use to approach different aspects of your organization. So She really started us out in the conversation thinking about and talking about anti-oppression, what that can look like in this work, thinking about what it looks like in our organizations, and then ended with those practical policy recommendations. And she even reiterated that she loves a good handbook, a good employee handbook, because it's a way to document what's going on and hold people accountable and like make sure that everyone's on the same page. When things go kind of unwritten, it can leave a lot of areas for things that happen differently for different people, which is going to follow the pattern of oppression if just left to people's biases, right? It was just really packed full of helpful information. And I'm looking forward to going back and looking at that again. Another one that was really helpful, and I won't go on and on, but definitely like encourage people to learn more, was a workshop. It was called Still I Rise, From Glass Ceilings to Glass Cliffs. And this was by Olivia Rivers. And she, of course, started off talking about Maya Angelou because it was inspired by Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. And it was talking about some of the issues that are faced by BIPOC leaders, and particularly by Black women who might be placed into leadership positions and then not supported or given like huge issues to solve. So calling that a glass cliff. So like there's kind of this illusion of being supported, this illusion of power. I don't know if it's necessarily an illusion of power, because there is power there, but when there's a lack of support, a lack of structure, a lack of like resources given, or these folks are expected to like clean up the mess of the person before them, that's a huge issue. And, you know, setting people up for failure basically, and putting that mess on Black women. So an example was like, you know, let's say an organization goes through a huge scandal or something, and then it's like, oh, now let's plaster, quote unquote, like a diversity hire to make us look good. And that's using that person, right, and setting them up for failure instead of actually supporting them. So the workshop was about not only watching out for that, but supporting people that are in these leadership positions and ensuring that they actually do have the resources and support that they need to be successful, and trying to like avoid the issue in the first place. So that was really helpful to hear as a white woman in a leadership position, trying to really reflect and think about what I can do to help avoid that and to support Black women, other BIPOC leaders, other folks from groups that are marginalized in this work.
Taylor, that's so interesting, because I think as technical assistance providers, we've seen some of that occur where folks are hired with little or no training or onboarding or a background that's different in this field. And it's not quite translating to the violence prevention or survivor services field. And in fact, we've seen the Women of Color Caucus of Ohio put out a statement recently addressing the repercussions of organizations not having policies or not seeing how racial diversity is an important lens to look through when you're looking at hiring, restructuring, and the future of your organization. So I'm really interested to see if this workshop will give us some tools we can use with our own perspective as the coalition that we can bring to the local programs. That's one of the things I love about this conference, is that we have this ability to take this really great stuff from across the country and bring it to Ohio specifically.
And I hope every other state is taking it to their state, and then we will be one big force to be reckoned with.
Right. I think that we could probably go on all day talking about it. Everybody can see the recordings of the plenary sessions on the NSAC website. So that is nationalsexualassaultconference.org. And you can see those. You can also read the descriptions, titles, and speaker names of the workshop sessions on there. So if anything sounded interesting or like anything that we brought up, you want to look more into that, you can find information there and see if perhaps you can reach out to that person and have them speak at your organization, or just in general try to learn more about those topics.
And a little birdie told me that the NSAC next year will be in Washington, D.C., so hopefully we will get to see even more people there, and people can tell me if I sound like I'm tall or short.
Yeah, each year we'll figure out what people think.
Yeah, right. What are my unconscious biases around height? I need to explore that and see where that is coming from. Where are these assumptions coming from?
Thank you so much for chatting with us, Caitlin. I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun to chat. I haven't had a chance to debrief with people, so this has been a really good time. So thanks, y'all.
I agree. Thank you.
Bye.
Adios.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Teal Talk. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into intersectional issues affecting survivors in Ohio. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review, recommend us to a friend, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at OAESV and Twitter at Ohio Alliance ESV. If you'd like to learn more about us and the services we offer, sign up for our email list, or read a transcript of this episode, visit oaesv.org.
Want to share a comment or ask a question for a future episode? Just click on the link in the show notes to leave us a voicemail. And remember, we're here to help. Feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. See you next time.